Hello, 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 and welcome once again to another My Life in Film. Last week we did 1980, so logically we're on 1981. And what a year. I'll let you know in advance, I am not going to be able to cover everything that had some kind of impact on me, so I've cherry-picked what I could, because this was quite a packed year. 1981, take it away. So, thanks for joining me once again as I sit and drink a cuppa. I'm actually using my... it's a very appropriate mug. This is a film quiz mug. All of the images relate to a film, and you have to try to work out what they all are. Pretty fun. All the answers are on the bottom, so I can't see what they are while I've got a drink in there. But anyway, let's get on with talking about 1981, because boy, what a year. When I was researching this, the list of films that I'd seen that I had memories of was huge. There's a few films that I've picked out that I've not got huge memories of, but I know that they impacted on me, and we'll get to that as we work through them. So let's start, as we always do, with a look at the box office for 1981. So at the top we've got Raiders of the Lost Ark, we've got On Golden Pond in second place. Superman 2, we spoke about that last time, but it carried over into this year, hence the reason why it's up there in the top 3 positions. Arthur, Stripes, Cannonball Run, Chariots of Fire, For Your Eyes Only, Four Seasons, and Time Bandits. There's a selection of films in there that I've definitely seen. There's a few that I've not, but they are ones that are on my list, because we'll get to that in a bit. This is the year that MGM bought United Artists. All the fallout after the disaster that was Heaven's Gate, and United Artists losing a huge chunk of money, meant that they were ripe for the picking, and they got picked up by MGM. Later in the year, United International Pictures would become the international distributor for all of the United Artists, Paramount and MGM productions. The 53rd Academy Awards were delayed one day this year because the date at which they were supposed to be coincided with the attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan's life earlier in that day. The president had a recorded speech before the awards the next day, so they literally delayed it just one day. At the awards, On Golden Pond and Chariots of Fire were the main winners, with Arthur picking up support actor for Sir John Gielgud, and Warren Beatty scored the director's gong for Reds. So let's move on to the films. Let's move on to the films of note. Now, we'll start with just some generic ones that... these aren't films that I particularly have a love for these days, but they definitely impacted me on some way. And yeah, you're going to work out what two of them were and why I was intrigued with them pretty swiftly. So let's start off with Escape to Victory. Now, this is a film that, as a youngster, I loved seeking out every time it was on TV, and like I've said in previous ones, we used to sit there with the Radio Times circling what things we wanted to watch, and this was something that if it popped up, I was like, I had to see this. Escape from Victory is by no means a good film. A recent revisit of it reminded me of actually how shoddy it is. But it's a World War II prisoner of war camp setting. Allied prisoners set up a football team, and they're then pitted against like a picked out German team for an exhibition match, and that's where they plan their escape to victory. The film is notable more for the stars involved. I mean, you've got the big names like Stallone, Kane, Max von Sydow. However, there's also people like Bobby Moore and, of course, Pele, who are not good actors, but they put them in there because, hey, football. Not a great film. Really, really laboured. It's an attempt to try to do like a Great Escape kind of film, but give it a sports kind of feel. And the prisons and sports have been done quite a few times. Mean Machine, The Longest Yard, etc. This is just another generic staple one of that, but adding in the whole like escaping from prisoner of war camp at the same time. Not worth watching. Next we have Body Heat. William Hurt and Kathleen Turner, a sizzling neo-erotic thriller, which I can't really tell you anything about the story because I don't know why, but as a teenager I was drawn to this film. Nope, can't quite put my finger on it. I will tell you that this film was the one that launched Kathleen Turner's career, and it also got her on Sexiest Women lists everywhere, and for very good reasons. I developed one hell of a teenage crush on Turner when I saw this. I wanted to see everything that she would be in from that point, but couldn't tell you anything about the plot. No, I clearly wasn't paying attention to the story going on. And Postman Always Rings Twice, much like Body Heat, another sizzling neo-erotic thriller. This one of about adultery and lust, Jessica Lange and Jack Nicholson. It's the fourth adaptation of the story, which came out in the 30s in a novel, and this is the steamiest. Again, I've only got a loose memory of the story of this, and the only reason I've got a loose memory of it is because I've seen one of the earlier adaptations. I've not revisited this film since my teen years, but I definitely watched it quite regularly back then, and all I've got to say is I've never been able to look at a kitchen table in the same way since. Let's just leave it at that. There's no disaster movies of note this year. I wonder why. Could it be because Airplane had just completely destroyed them the previous year? So we're not going to talk about disaster movies for the first time in quite a while. But what we will talk about, and this is a theme that comes back quite frequently, is your sci-fi, fantasy and adventure. And this year had a lot. I mean, right at the top of the films for the year, we had Raiders of the Lost Ark. Steven Spielberg directed from a story that him and George Lucas had come up with. Harrison Ford in the title role, Karen Allen as an absolutely delightful damsel in distress with a fiery attitude. It's action, it's adventure, it's timeless. Oh, come on, you've seen it. Surely you've seen it. I mean, everyone must have seen this film by now, or at least be aware of it. It's a perfect meld of everything, from the staples of those serialised adventure things, which is what they were drawing from like the 30s, 40s, etc. Putting it into a film format. It's got memorable moments, it's got great cast moments, and it's also got one of my favourite improvised moments, which is the sword fighter swinging his swords everywhere, and Indiana just pulls his gun out, shoots him and walks away. And that was done on the day because Harrison was a bit under the weather that day and couldn't film a whole action sequence, so they just came up on the day. It was like, well, I've got guns, why would I go into this? Why don't I just shoot him? Boom. Instantly memorable. Great film. If you've seriously not watched this film, go and watch it. Seriously, this is an absolute joy. This is something that even when you go back and revisit it today, the effects work still stands up, the story still stands up, the cast are amazing. It's a brilliant, timeless classic. Excalibur is another one that I always urge people to see. John Boorman directed the film. It's one of my favourite films of all time. If I was to write out a list of top 10 films, now whilst this list changes quite frequently, there's a couple of films that always stay in there. It's a Wonderful Life clearly always stays in there, and this is one that always stays in there. I've always had a fondness for Arthurian legend. I was always interested in it. I used to read like little Arthurian like translations and things like that. I was enamoured by the whole setting, and this for me is the definitive film of Arthurian legend. Nigel Terry, Helen Mirren, Liam Neeson, Sheri Lungi, Patrick Stewart, great cast, but the standout is Nicole Williamson as Merlin. His interpretation of Merlin was something that hadn't been done before, and whilst it's been attempted to be emulated since, I mean, even the most recent TV series Cursed, which looks at the origins of the Lady of the Lake, the Merlin in that is kind of in the same vein as Williamson's, but anywhere near it. If you've never seen Excalibur, it is a lavish and also dirty film. It is really grimy. The fights are not like all like, well, haha, and we are knights of the round table. They are proper dirty upfront battles. It's a great film. Thoroughly worth exploring. Mad Max 2 came out this year. Now, the first film built up a bit of an audience, but it was very low key, it was very like low budget, and it didn't quite hit the ground. Whereas Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, as it was subtitled, it was more of a budget, and it gave George Miller a chance to really show what his post-apocalyptic environment would be. and it kind of set the tone for where the films would go going forward. So you've got like the costume design of like weird gangs dressed in strange bondage gear, basically. It's leathers, it's spikes, it's weird designs. It's a real setting of isolation for any small communities. And the story of this one is that there's a settlement that is set up around an oil refinery, and obviously in this post-apocalyptic world, oil and petrol and everything is it's the biggest luxury. Everyone wants them for their weird vehicles that they've concocted together. The refinery is put under siege by a gang of marauders who basically say, give us the petrol or we'll come in and kill you all. They're going to kill them all anyway, they know that. However, Max is around because he's recently taken up a bit of residence there, and he offers to help them because he has a plan. This is the film that really, it has a simple premise, but it really sets the tone for the Mad Max world. And whilst it is a sequel to the first one, there's little subtleties that leave it as a standalone film, and each of the Mad Max films have inconsistencies and continuity things that don't quite match up to the previous films. And I've always said that it's because we are not watching a representation of what happened, we are watching a representation of what people's tales of what happened are. So it's basically we are seeing mythological stories being retold. Great film. The action in it is brutal and fantastic. There's some memorable lines. For me, this is the best of the series. Fury Road is really, really good, and we'll get to that way, way ahead when I get to those years. But Mad Max 2 is the one that I actually watched this before I watched the first one, and I fell in love with this film. Absolutely amazing, well worth seeing. Ignore the fact that Mel Gibson has a bit of a reputation these days. Separate art from the artist. Watch this film. Great. Time Bandits. Terry Gilliam delivers a comedy sci-fi adventure about a kid with a very vivid imagination who's largely ignored by his parents and ends up following a gang of dwarves who bust out of his wardrobe looking for a doorway, as they use the map that they stole from their boss to travel through time and steal some loot. It's fun, it's nonsense, it's an excuse to patch a load of short sketches together, but it works. It works because of the approach that it's taken. It works because of the underlying story where they're being pursued by their boss, who might or might not be the man upstairs, whilst also the Dark One is trying to get hold of this map so that he can use it for his own nefarious means. There's cameos galore in here, which make it even more of a pleasure. Sean Connery, Shelley Duvall, Ian Holm, David Warner, John Cleese as a brilliant Robin Hood, and Jim Broadbent, many, many more. A great, fun film. This is one that I go back to every couple of years and I still enjoy, much like most of Gilliam's work, particularly his earlier work. Dragon Slayer was another... I told you there's a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. Dragon Slayer. Now, this is a film that I haven't really revisited since childhood. I think the last time I watched this, I must have been in my mid-teens when it was on TV. And I remember seeing this when it was actually released at the cinema, way back in 81. And I was amazed and drawn in. The dragon designs were spectacular. There was something about it that it just wowed me, and I was obsessed with it. I also recall, over the years, being constantly met with blank expressions whenever I've mentioned this film. And for a while, I did actually think that I'd dreamed it or hallucinated it, and it never really existed. Thankfully, in this day and age, all the things that I thought that I dreamt and hallucinated, it's easy to find reference to somewhere online. Such as Alias the Jester, animated TV series from the 80s. If you've never heard of it, go and seek it out. Maybe you can understand exactly why I'm so obsessed with it. You probably won't, but I was obsessed with it. But no one ever remembered it. Kurt Russell and John Carpenter teamed up again this year to create one of the most iconic images that has only been in a couple of films. Snake Plissken. Escape from New York was released. Now, this is a dystopian future society. New York, turned into Manhattan Island in particular, was such a disastrous, crime-riddled area that they've ended up walling it off, and it's become a prison. And so all the worst criminals are dumped in there and just left to fend for themselves. Well, When the president's airplane is shot down over New York and the president is taken hostage, Snake Plissken is dragged out, strapped with a collar around his neck that will explode if he doesn't rescue the president within a certain time, and told that his own prison sentence will be reduced if he saves the president. If he fails, his head explodes. Simple. Why not? Memorable, iconic. Kurt Russell is the reason this film really works. He sells the role. The role of Snake Plissken is it's basically an interpretation of like your Clint Eastwood kind of man with no name characters. You know, the gritty outlaw, edgy character who's, you know, got some morals but not a lot. You know, walking into town, iconic presences, great, well worth seeing. Don't ever watch the sequel, Escape from LA. This is the film to watch, and this is the film that started such a huge cult following around. And despite the fact we've only had those two films, it feels like we've had a lot more, and it feels like we deserve a lot more. There's constant campaigns to get more Snake Plissken on screen. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. In the meantime, Escape from New York, perfect dystopian sci-fi. For perfect Greek mythology. Now, whenever you think Greek mythology on film, things like Jason and the Argonauts, etc., you always think of Harryhausen. This year had Ray Harryhausen's final bit of effects work for any film, and boy, what a film. Clash of the Titans, the Greek mythology tale of Perseus, is brought to vivid life thanks to Harryhausen's work. The story is taken straight from the myth, has the gods playing their games with man. Perseus, who's the son of Zeus, who was cast and hoped to die, was protected and then given his true destiny, and works to find a way to slay the Kraken and save the princess. Basic Greek mythology. But the effects in this film is what really stick with you. I mean, you have the origin of Calibos, who slayed all of the Pegasus except for one in Zeus's garden. You've got the Pegasus itself, marvellous creation. You've got the Kraken that is threatening coastal areas. You've got Dioscius, the two-headed hound. You've got giant scorpions, and of course you've got the Medusa the Gorgon. This representation of her is the one that sticks in everyone's mind. This is the version that chills, and the scene with Perseus trying to get her head without catching her gaze is tense, and it's fraught with peril, and it's perfectly choreographed. Everything within this film, like you'd expect whenever Harryhausen was involved in effects, is so well choreographed that his stop motion work is almost seamless with the actual action around them. Absolutely marvellous. The modern CGI remakes don't even scratch the surface of how great this film is. This is definitely one of the best outings for Harryhausen. If not a great film, it's a great one for all of his talent. What a piece of work to go out on. And finally, in this little sub-chapter of action, adventure, sci-fi and fantasy, another film that for years I was convinced I'd dreamt because no one seemed to remember it, but it's gained a resurgence in recent years of notoriety, thanks largely to people of my age group who are now in creative jobs. So like your comic book writers and artists, your film writers, directors, etc. There's been a lot of them talking about this film because we've all got a love and a soft spot for Condor Man. The film is the story of a comic book artist and a writer who decides that his character of Condor Man that he draws on the page needs to be brought to life, and so he actually designs the costume and the vehicles to become Condor Man. The plot sees him embroiled in an international incident where he's trying to save the world from big megalomaniac. It's basically Bond meets Batman with a comical sense of approach. Michael Crawford was cast in this, and he was known in the UK for a few things, but mostly some mothers do have him sitcom in which he played a bit of a hapless character. In this, he brings his comic charm, and like I say, for years I thought I dreamt it. So I went from my childhood loving it, and I actually had like the Condor Man car as a toy. Brilliant. I wish I still had it. And for a couple of decades, nothing. Couldn't find anything about it. Talking about it, people were just blank expression. Are you mad? Was this really a film? Over the recent years, since it's got a resurgence, it's become easier to get access to. And I rewatched it 2 years ago, and I still thoroughly enjoyed it. Will a new audience embrace it? It is a bit shonky. I think my nostalgia helps me love it a lot more. But I'd like to think that there is still enough charm in there to make people welcome it and embrace it. If you've not checked it out, go and seek it out. You might find you enjoy it. Let's move on to horror, because horror was really picking up this year. So let's start with the sequels. So first of all, we got Omen 3. Now, whereas the first film was absolutely classic, instantly revisitable, and still stands up today, and the second film was just more of the same, more memorable deaths, didn't really do much, but it was slightly progressing the story. This third one sees Damien all grown up and ready to take over the world, and whilst it tries for more of the same, it's drab and immediately forgettable. I watched this in my early teens, and that was the last time I watched it. It's the last time I intended to watch it. Even then, I knew that it was very lacklustre. Halloween 2, however. Now, the Halloween franchise is an interesting one, because when it was started up, it was intended to be an anthology series, and so Halloween 2 would have been a completely different story. And Halloween 3, when we get to it, we'll talk about that a bit more. But instead, after the ending of Halloween had audiences going, oh, what happens next? They decided, let's make a film that picks up straight from that ending. So Rick Rosenthal is directing this time, and Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasance continuing the hunt to stop Michael from killing again. It's more of the same. I know that in recent history it might not be part of the lore, because it keeps getting rewritten as to what's the actual history and what isn't. But this is one that the first two Halloween films I would always happily sit and watch. Even Halloween 3, we'll talk about that when we get to it. I will rewatch that for other reasons. And then all the ones that came in between, before we got to Halloween H2O, are a mess. But this second film is a great sequel. It's nowhere near as good as the first, and a lot of that is down to the direction. Rosenthal isn't as confident in his direction as what Carpenter was, but well worth checking out. And Friday the 13th Part 2 came out this year as well, and much like Halloween, this was a series that was intended to be an anthology series at first, but the surprise twist ending made audiences go, ooh, and made the filmmakers go, let's explore the mythology of Camp Crystal Lake a bit more. And so this time we start to move into the supernatural aspects, because Jason, the kid who is under the water dead, is apparently back. And we all know where it goes after this. It goes again like the Halloween series. After this film, it rapidly goes downhill. But this film's worth seeing because this is the introduction of Jason Voorhees as the main killer. More of the same as the first film. Camp Crystal Lake is the setting. What's not to love? If you like your slasher films, this is worth seeing. Joe Dante gave us a horror based on a book which involved werewolves, and that was The Howling. Dee Wallace and Patrick McNee star. But with this film, and this is a film that I've not revisited for quite a few years, at least 2 decades, but I did watch a good few times throughout my early 20s, because the effects work by Rob Bottin really stood out. This was a good time for effects work, as will be demonstrated by the next horror film, which I'm going to mention, which again is werewolves, and it's American Werewolf in London. Now this is the more successful and more well known of the werewolf films from this year. John Landis, horror comedy with David Norton, Griffin Dunn, and of course, Jenny Agutter. I've already spoken about my love for Jenny Agutter, and She's amazing in this. The effects work in American Werewolf in London, which the story sees two American backpackers travelling through the Yorkshire moors, stop off at a pub called the Slaughtered Lamb, where everyone's a bit weird and local, and then they feel uncomfortable and start heading out and get told, "Don't go on the moors, stick to the roads, lads." And they don't. They wander off track and end up getting attacked by a werewolf. One of them survives, one of them doesn't. And the one who survives, David, he starts to get strange cravings, and it's possible that he may be a werewolf. He keeps getting told this by his dead friend who keeps visiting him and keeps trying to encourage him to kill himself. But he falls in love with a nurse who takes care of him and takes him home, because that's what happens. Nurses take you home. It's a great film. It's got some great witty moments, but it's notorious for the Rick Baker special effects that won the very first makeup awards at the Oscars. The transformation scene is memorable, and everyone's seen like the various moments in it. It still stands up today. It's a film that is such a joy to watch, and every time that I watch it, I fall in love with Jenny Agutter again. Great film, one of the best horrors of the year. Another film that is one of the iconic films of the year, Scanners. Cronenberg's film is notorious for its head exploding scene. Everyone knows that scene of the quick snip between like him looking uncomfortable and then it exploding is so well edited that it had brutal impact. The film sees Patrick McGowan and Michael Ironside amongst others in a film about scanners, or strong psychics who can use telekinesis against people and a resistance movement, etc., etc. Michael Ironside, for me, was the draw to this, as was Patrick McGowan, who I loved from the TV series The Prisoner. And I've not seen it for a while, but this was a one that me and my mates in my late teens, we were obsessed with. We watched it multiple times. We were fascinated by the way that the effects were done, because now we know how it was done with the melon and all that. Back then, trying to see how they did these effects by like watching something over and over, and it's like, whoa, what are we looking at here? So it was more through the interest in film and effects work that we kept revisiting this. We were absolutely blown away by it, and this was probably, I'd say that this is the film that put me on the track to exploring more Cronenberg, which was never a bad thing, because Cronenberg has delivered some of my favourite films. And finally, for horror, I can't go past this without mentioning The Evil Dead. Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell start the ball rolling on a film series that will be notorious for being banned in the UK as a video nasty, will grow a cult audience, and will become something that people are constantly, even today, clamouring for more of. And we've had such a wide array of Evil Dead films, from the Bruce Campbell starring ones. We've had a TV series, Ash vs. the Evil Dead, and we've had a reboot, reimagining by Fede Alvarez a few years ago, which went back to the horror aspect of the first film, because this first film is more horror than comedy. Whilst the second film went for a bit over the top and started adding the comedy aspects, there are some humorous moments in this, but most of it is played seriously and chillingly. And I actually prefer this to Evil Dead 2. Love them both, but this is my preferred film. Again, some great effects work utilised in it, but what's most standoutish is how Raimi used such a low budget amazingly creatively to give us chilling impacts. You've got the way that the tracking shot of the Evil Dead moving through, the presence moving through the forest, which was done by strapping a camera on wooden boards and running with it, and it gives it that wobbly whoa kind of approach. Absolutely simple in concept, but effective in implementation. This is one of the most memorable horror films and the most iconic horror films. If you've never seen the first Evil Dead, If you watch it now, you will see why it was considered a video nasty in the early parts of the 80s. There are some scenes that are brutally shocking in the implementation. But that's the whole point. Horror should always unnerve and should always disturb. And thankfully, once we got into the 90s, the BBFC reconsidered their approach to it and allowed us to finally get this film on VHS. And it was one of my earliest VHS purchases as a student. Let's move on to comedy. I need something to calm myself down after all those chilling things. Not a huge year for comedies that stood out for me. There's Arthur, the Dudley Moore and Liza Minnelli film, which sees a billionaire who's set to wed someone through an arranged marriage who falls in love with a working class girl. The standout star in this film is John Gielgud as his ever loyal manservant Hobson. The film is charmingly comical. It's a film I keep wanting to revisit, but every time I think about revisiting it, I'm sadly reminded of the awful remake of the past decade with Russell Bloody Brand in it. So I will get round to rewatching this at some point, because I do want to see whether it's still got the charm that remembered. But I remember, like, this was another film that after I first watched it on TV, I looked out for it in future. And whilst it had a sequel, Arthur 2 on the Rocks, it doesn't have the same impact as this simple, charming tale of a drunken billionaire. Porkys was one that had an impact on me during my teenage years for very, very obvious reasons. I had a huge fondness for this film, and if you've seen the film, you'll probably understand why as a teenager I had a fondness. Now, Kim Cattrall piqued my interest in this film. Oh, she was delightful. But comedy-wise, on a recent rewatch a few years ago, I still find myself laughing at some of the moments, but the majority of the experience is cringeworthy in this day and age. The college campus humour approach that it took would be refined by the time we get to the American Pie films in the late 90s. But here, it was full out. It was playing for shocks more than anything else. And the story sees a gang of college kids get on the wrong side of the owner of an adult bar, and the troubles that start between the state border police and them through all this. Moments of hilarity do exist. Most notoriously, a prank phone call involving someone asking for someone called Michael Hunt, or Mike for short. I'll leave you to piece that together. Is it worth watching? If you're a fan of your American Pie kind of humours, then yes, because you get to see where that humour kind of started from, because we'd had college humour films. I mean, even American Graffiti in the 70s is a college humour film. This was the area that took it to the more smutty side, and then by the time of the American Pie franchise, they kind of melded the two together and took the best of both worlds and created the perfect formula. So it's interesting as a historical look at where humour was going at that point in time, but expect to cringe quite a lot. And we also, this year, had Hal Needham taking all the antics that he made in Smoking the Bandit with car crashes and action and fun and comedy, removed any need for story by just having the basic story be, there's a car race across the US. And he gave us Cannonball Run. Now, it's a very loose plot. Having the race across the US just was an excuse to have comedy and stunts as all the rivals try to outdo each other using any devious tricks that they can. You've got Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise, who reteamed on this after Smoking the Bandit 2. They're front and centre, but it's the wide array of co-stars and cameos that really make this an absolute pleasure to watch. You've got Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Jackie Chan, Farrah Fawcett, and Roger Moore playing an actor who identifies as Roger Moore and drives an Aston Martin DB5. It's immense fun, and it's so rewatchable. Definitely get this checked out. If you've listened to me so far talking about Smoking the Bandit and Smoking the Bandit 2 and how much fun they are, then Cannonball Run is more of the same. Don't expect any huge plots, just expect a wild ride. Family films, we saw a great Muppet caper. So the Muppets now do a heist movie for the second film, and it's pretty much everything you expect from the Muppet stable. I've not rewatched this for a long time, but it is on Disney Plus, so I have added it to my shortlist because I intend to go through all of the Muppets films again. And Fox and the Hound. This was the 24th Disney animation, and it's a tale of friendship between two very unlikely characters, a fox named Todd and a hunting dog named Copper. The innocence of childhood friendship between the two, where they accept people for who they are, is explored in beautiful detail. And then as they age, it's the environmental and social pressures that teach them to hate or distrust the other. And this is a message that's actually still relevant today. This is a pure message in this film, and that anyone who doesn't feel a lump in their throat at moments of this classic are completely dead inside. I think that everyone should be shown Fox and the Hound as a child and then shown it again as an adult, so they can reflect on themselves and how their own opinions towards, people who are different might have been influenced by other factors, and they've forgotten we should just all accept each other for who we all are. Good message, great film, and I feel myself welling up at the moment just thinking about it. I had the sticker album for this. I loved this film, and I'd love to go back to this film. This, for me, was one of the most iconic Disney films which came out during my childhood. There was ones that came out before I was alive that I watched later on, but this was one of the most iconic ones during my childhood. It's stuck with me ever since. Bond, let's just wrap up now, because this has been quite a long one this week. I told you there was a lot this week. Bond. This year we had Bond, and we had For Your Eyes Only. Stop doing Bond wrong. It's not a great film. It feels like a bunch of set pieces were concocted, and then he went, how can we loosely string these together? And whereas that works in something like Cannonball Run that's not taking itself seriously, in the Bond franchise, you want something a bit more substantial. Just don't get me wrong, the set pieces are great. The set pieces stand out, but the plot to link them is weak, and it's not the worst Bond film. It is in the bottom half of the listings of Bond films. But because it was released between Moonraker and Octopussy, it looks a lot better than what it was. Because Moonraker was dreadful. This came along and people went, oh, it's getting good again. Whoa. Octopussy, we'll get to that when it comes out, but not a good one. Films that I've not seen. Now, this is the bit that I always start to worry about what kind of finger pointing and criticisms I'll get. Blowout, the Brian De Palma film, which was basically a remake of the 1960s film Blow Up, which I have seen. But this time, whereas Blow Up was about a crime is captured on a roll of film accidentally by a photographer, and the Blow Up is basically expanding the image to find out the full details and find out who it was, and it puts the photographer in jeopardy. With this, it's a sound recorder, picks up something in the background of the sound that he was trying to get, and so he blows it out to try to piece it together and discovers that he's uncovered a crime taking place, and it puts his life in jeopardy. I've heard a lot about this. I've heard it's very good. I've never watched it. Das Boot is a film that this is one of the films that I feel that I should have watched, because it gets referenced so often that maybe it's about time I got off my bottom, tracked it down and got it watched. And then there's two of those Oscar films from earlier that I've not watched, and these are the two that I said are on my list to get round to watching. On Golden Pond and Chariots of Fire. Yes, I've not seen Chariots of Fire. Yes, it was all over the place when it came out. Yes, I was sick of hearing that music constantly playing. That's probably why I've never watched it. But like I say, I'm working through me Oscar films that I've missed throughout the years, so I'll no doubt get to them soon. If there's any other films that you feel that I've left out from 1981, by all means, down below in the comments, fire them away. Let me know. If I've seen them, I'll reply in the comment to say what I thought of them. If I've not seen them, I'll add them onto my list. But I do love reading any comments that I get, even if they are, mocking me. Like, subscribe, share. Thank you for watching once again. This I think these are going to get longer and longer as we get on, because we're really getting into my, I was 8 this year. As we start getting between this age and up to my mid-teens, there's going to be a lot of films that impact on me, because this was when I was starting to really recognise what films I was watching on the big screen. And like I've said before, my mum loved to take us to the cinema as a treat, and so I got to see a lot of films, a lot. And then once I got into my teens, I started going with my sisters, and then on my own or with my friends. So there's going to be a load. I've got a nagging suspicion once we get to like me being 16 years old, we're going to be talking. I'm going to be talking for about 2 hours on one of these. Might have to split it into multiple parts. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to my rambling once again. Catch you next time.